Welcome to the Outside Insights podcast. Our goal is to provide content and ideas that help you close your personal and professional gaps by hearing how other people have done it. I'm your host, Chris Burkhardt, and today I'm beyond thrilled to have Dr. Wes Bowman on the show. Thank you for being on the show, Wes.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted.
So I know this is your first podcast, so we're going to just get right into it. Wes is a career psychologist. He's director of the Delaware Family Center in Wilmington, Delaware. But we thought a great way to kind of give his background, we get right into a story. And you've got a story about you and college and some things, and I'll just kind of hand it off to you.
Thank you. I'll be brief. So when I was I'll start a little earlier. When I was in the fourth grade, in October, my fourth grade teacher called my mother, who was a high school history teacher, and said, "I think your son is retarded." She was shocked, dismayed. They rushed me to get tested, and I tested very well. And so she went back and told my fourth grade teacher, and the teacher said, "Well, then he's just lazy." So those were my two options at 9 years old. So I should send her a thank you note because I've spent my entire life proving that I'm neither mentally deficient nor lazy. And it's added to some success.
Wes, there's a back and forth with this. I was at a state college in Maryland, pretty smart kid, pretty lazy, and I had to take a remedial writing class to get into college. And I'm thinking I'm hot stuff, by the way. I'm in this class, and the resident assistant or the instructor teaching it is an adjunct, and she's cute, and I'm 18, and I can't hide that, right? So she says, "Mr. Burkhardt, would you stay after class?" I'm thinking, I've got a coffee date or something. College is great. And I know we don't normally use the word you used in today, but she literally said to me, "Mr. Burkhardt, are you retarded?" So I've had that said, and it was like rocket fuel for me.
Well, it's shaming. It's a derogatory term today, and it should have been back then.
Yeah. So I'm just swapping stories, but for you, it was obviously you're sending a thank you to that teacher.
Well, so poor thing, I feel sorry for her because from that point on, every time anything good happened to me, academically or in extracurricular stuff or in sports, my mother would stop by the library where she was now the head librarian and just let her know how my life was going. The poor woman got hit over the head with my success for about 2 decades.
You got to take your motivation where you can, I guess,
Yes.
so many ways.
So flash forward, I was a high school and college student in the late 60s and early 70s, which was the hippie era, and I was embracing every bit of it and filled with shame because I flunked out of or washed out of college 3 times, once in Mississippi, once in Louisiana, once in North Carolina. But during the time in North Carolina, I was running a jean shop in a mall for a guy. So I was his assistant manager and then manager. And all of my buddies were crazy rock and roll, get high dudes. And I hired them and they worked for me. But I felt ashamed because my dad was an accountant and my mother was a history professor by this time. And my grandfather was a president of a seminary. So I was failing. Flash forward, something clicked in me and I decided I'd saved a little money. I went back home and like the prodigal son and went back to school. I realized I had about a year and a half to get free tuition where my mother was teaching. And so I took 21 hours a semester for 3 semesters, 2 summer terms, 2 winter terms, and graduated third in my class. But more importantly, when I got through graduate school, I had to do 2 things. I was specializing in treating addiction, so I had to have relationships with people with drug and alcohol problems. Well, these were my best friends. Second thing is I had to learn how to run a business. I already knew how to run a business. So the 2 things that I was experiencing while I was filled with shame and failure were the 2 most important pieces of launching my career.
My father says all the time, he's a serial entrepreneur, that there's no one path, right? And you learn things you wouldn't have got from early college, right? And lessons.
Right.
So obviously that's how you run your shop today, from those experiences in so many
Well,
ways.
it gave me a clarity about myself and my patients and the companies I do consulting with, that we don't we don't necessarily have the answers, and our judgments about our current situation may or may not be right, but it's certainly useful to take a look at all of that in a curious way rather than a shaming or judgmental way.
How did you know this was going to be your calling, Wes?
About 15 years ago, I was asked to speak at the Employee Assistance Association national meeting,
Yes.
and they wanted to know how I built my shop. And most of them were terribly disappointed in my presentation because it basically required me to show up, keep my eyes open, be awake, and pick the right opportunities when they rolled in serendipitously. And I went through, stage after stage of my career, and a couple of wiser, usually older folks after this talk said, "I get it." And so that I humbly acknowledge that I was born with the ability to kind of keep my eyes open and try to choose wisely. And that's how I did it. I don't set a goal and say, I'm going to make that happen.
So I think there's some great advice because there's a lot of entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs that listen to me. And I think, it's such a hard thing, right? Like everybody wants to romanticize and make entrepreneurship into you're a rock star, right? Like it's these big risks. But no, I think a lot of times it is, I think there's a bank today that has an ad about being boring for 150 years. I'm not saying I'm boring or you're boring, but my business got a lot more successful when I sort of became disciplined and aware and rhythmic and, totally get what you're saying. So a dear friend of 20 years sent me an article of yours called Navigating Unexpected Change. And for whatever reason, I was on the verge of like crying reading it and just,
Wow.
and I love the reference to spirituality and the explanation of so many topics. As I was very excited to have you on here. And I know, I'm sure you don't do this every day, but I just was so impressed with your ideas and how you've approached things that rather than have you tell one patient, I was hoping 52,000 people could hear some of your ideas. No pressure for both of us, right?
Right.
But that was very motivating to me. And I think I mentioned this to you. Had a series of entrepreneurs on the show, and we really have gotten to the edge about their mental health journeys and the number that shared, how they felt and, the thoughts of being trapped in the darkness and in some cases even suicidal thoughts. So there's just so much to it. Where do you want to start? United States of, you want to start there?
The
Okay,
United
say it.
States, the United States of Amygdala.
Yes, sir. There
So,
you go.
so I thought of that term about a week ago, and it just popped into my head. And so, for those of you who don't know what the amygdala is, it's a little walnut-sized part of the brain deep in the back here, and it regulates our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight response. It's been there since caveman days. And what I tell people is it has no thinking and reasoning ability, it has no IQ, it has no judgment, it has no impulse control. It's just an alarm that goes off that sends signals to your pituitary and adrenal glands and other parts of your system to dump adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream so that you can either get geared up to fight or get geared up to haul ass and run away. It's not much different now than caveman days. The difference is,
the hair standing up on the back of my neck on the Serengeti. Is that thing?
yes, that's it.
Hey, right. I'm with
Yeah.
you.
So in caveman days, it was very useful because think about it. What did they have to do? Wake up and be alert,
Yes.
find food, don't get eaten. Well, our predators are very different today. They're complex, they're chronic, and they don't go anywhere. Some of them are on 24 hours, 7 day a week, 365 a day news channels. Some of them have to do with mortgages and finances. Some have to do with communities and neighbors. But we can't run away from them. We can't kill them and eat them. We have to figure out a way to regulate them and manage them. The United States of Amygdala is where I'm saying, what do we do with that overactive primal brain that has nowhere to release or nowhere to find safe harbor?
So you're caveman in a cyber tech world.
Right.
You know, Wes, the most watched episode I've ever done is I had Dr. Thompson, who's a functional medicine doctor, on, and a lot of the comments and discussions was exactly what you're talking about. Like, once this thing gets going, how do
Yeah.
you calm it down? How do you
Right.
soothe this thing?
Okay. So would you like me to talk a little about that?
I'd love for you to.
So there's several different tiers. The core basic physiological tier is learning to regulate your sympathetic arousal. Now, in Asia, India and China and other Asian countries, they've known this for 5,000 plus years. Of course, in our Western world, we have to empirically prove it and say that we discovered it. We're accepting it, but we didn't discover it. Back in probably the late 70s, a guy named Herbert Benson decided to take a look at the sympathetic nervous system. And he said, well, when this parasympathetic, which is the other side of the seesaw, that calm, I call it the third day of vacation feeling.
For me, it's ninth day,
There you
unfortunately.
go.
Not third day. I wish
You're
it
tough.
were. Yeah. I'm still
So-
cranking up the first 8 days.
So Benson was saying, well, what is that? Let's see if we can figure out what that is. Well, what that is a calm nervous system, relaxed breathing, relaxed muscles, tendons, ligaments, and a clear mind. So his question, empirical question, was, can we train humans to do that? And so he took, borrowed from Eastern meditation practices and basically developed this deep muscle relaxation training exercise and had people do this for day in and day out for several weeks. And you actually learn to regulate your breathing, your heart rate, where your mind goes, and to relax your body. So that's the first tier of intervention, is gaining control of that sympathetic, parasympathetic seesaw. But it's not an aspirin for a headache. It takes daily commitment, disciplines.
Is that one of the reasons like a meditation doesn't work overnight? It takes a commitment to
Right. You're basically adding to you're not changing your brain, you're adding to what your brain already does. So, your brain is programmed to be overactive sympathetic response. So you have to develop overriding neural firings, neural pathways that give you some regulation over that seesaw.
Wes, one of the cool things about podcasts is that there's show notes. So in the spirit of this, we'll put some, like the person you've mentioned, maybe we'll put an article or a link in some way to some of this. So it's one of the things that people really enjoy. So as we talk about books and things, we'll collect them so that, you're providing references to people.
Right.
That
His book was The Relaxation Response, I believe.
appreciate that. Do you want to go through the rest of it?
Okay, so the next tier that I work with clients on or groups is the cognitive intervention, which is, again, another ancient wisdom from all cultures, religions, philosophies. The Old Testament, as a man thinketh, so is he. A Buddhist reference, the mind is the forerunner of all things. Ancient Greece, and later in Hamlet, Shakespeare referenced nothing exists in heaven and earth, but thinking makes it so. Flash forward a few hundred years, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. But my favorite, kind of in a nutshell, statement is by a guy named Gary Emery from the Center for Cognitive Therapy out in Los Angeles. In your mind, via your thoughts, you create your own separate reality.
Say that again.
In your mind, via your thoughts, you create your own separate reality.
Is this like saying an imagined worry is always much worse than the actual worry?
Well, it's Mark Twain, I think, I'll paraphrase, but he said, I've experienced many horrible things in my life, and a few of them have actually happened.
All right.
So anyway, with that knowledge, a guy named Donald Meichenbaum up in Toronto back in the 70s decided to research that, and he took a couple of experimental groups. One was people in treatment for anxiety and severe stress. Another was what I call disgustingly healthy people. And he would have them write down their thoughts for days and days and have his graduate students follow him around for days and days. Brought all this data back to the lab. Not surprisingly, the anxious people thought very differently than the disgustingly healthy people.
Makes sense.
For example, the anxious people, when they wake up in the morning, their first thought is a dreadful thought. Oh God, what's going to happen? What did I forget? What did I do wrong? How am I going to get this all done? Just immediately gripped with forethought of doom and worry. You know what the first thought of the healthy folks are when they wake up in the morning?
It's a good day.
I need to pee.
I think you're 100% right, except it's around 4:30 in the morning when that happens, right? So Wes, when for all of us, aren't we disgustingly healthy and anxiety riddled?
Well, the good news is there are a number of other kind of pivotal cognitive differences, but he took the healthy group, put together a treatment manual, and went to the anxious group, took them through about 8 weeks of cognitive behavior training, and their symptoms got better.
Well, I mean, obviously, uh, I think the mind's a powerful thing, and if any of us gets some objective viewpoint, I think it's got to make a difference in that regard. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. It makes total
So,
sense to me.
so in a nutshell, the cognitive interventions are, again, parallel with what Eastern philosophy and some Christian perspectives, Sufi perspectives, a lot of similar ways of thinking. Be here and now, focus on your five senses and your thoughts, make choices based on what's useful, what's skillful. When you find yourself becoming self critical or critical of others or angry or terrified, observe your thoughts or observe your feelings, but try to pull yourself back to what's here, what's now, what's next. Jack Kornfield says, treat your attention like a puppy in your lap. It'll wander off, but just gently bring it back to right here, right now.
I heard it said that my thoughts are like clouds on I-95. I don't know if that works, but it works for me. That just pull up a chair and watch them go by. My hope is, I interrupted you. Keep going.
So the reality is thoughts and feelings aren't real. They're just thoughts and feelings. Real have to do with our five senses and how we collect data and how we perceive it accurately and what we do with it.
Is that why everybody recommends the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to get grounded? See 5 things, hear 4 things.
Yes. Actually, again, if we go back to the primal brain,
Yes?
the caveman didn't need to stop and ponder.
Okay, right.
The caveman needed to act to survive, and that's why we're here today.
That
So to stop and count to 10.
got eaten.
Right.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Right. So our ancestors reacted.
I don't know how I got through then because I'm a ponderer. My answers must have been hiding or something, I would say.
Now, a couple of other things about this intervention stuff. One is that a lot of times people with significant stress and anxiety are people pleasers, they're high achievers, and they are conflict avoiders. And so they have difficulty saying no and setting boundaries. So learning assertive behavior and practicing assertive behavior can really help not only reduce stress and tension, but also help you walk the path that you want and need to walk, not that someone else wants for you.
So what's one technique?
Well, there's a book that I referenced in my bibliography I sent you called When I Say No, I Feel Guilty.
Okay.
The techniques would be, if you tend to be non-assertive, conflict avoidant, people pleasing, begin practicing as you go through the day, even if you don't say anything to anybody. What do I want right now?
Okay.
Like, not what does anybody else, even if I can't have it, even if I choose otherwise, begin to identify what I want. Because as a non-assertive person, I'm clear about what everybody else wants, but I may have no clue what I want. So first you have to know who you are and what you want. The second is to have, kind of get your courage up to set a boundary. And sometimes you can say that by saying, well, let me think about that. So you buy yourself some time to get out of the anxiety and the conflict avoidant response. So figure out a menu of responses that give you a little cushion of time to make a decision. The other is to have a menu of things that put up the boundary. Oh, you know what? That's not going to work for me. One of my favorite cartoons from the New Yorker years ago, The guy's standing at his desk and he's got this paper calendar in front of him. He's on the phone and he goes, "Oh, wait, here. How about never? Does never work for you?"
Well, I don't practice this all the time, but in the spirit of that, no. When I get asked to speak or maybe agree to do something, I try to ask myself if I would do it right now
Okay.
versus 6 weeks from now. It's funny how I'll say yes to something 8 weeks from now, right? It doesn't seem like it's going to, interrupt
Right.
my time.
It seems doable in 8 weeks.
It does, but if tomorrow I won't do it, maybe I shouldn't do it in 8 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
It might be something to that.
Yep.
I think hearing some practical things like that are very helpful because I think there's an epidemic of people unable to say no, right?
Well,
What
and
did
there are
they
good
do?
reasons. Good reasons. I mean, people are afraid for their jobs, for promotions, for raises. They're afraid they're going to be rejected by friends or colleagues or neighbors. It's like we want to belong and we want to be thought of well and respected. And so we're kind of afraid to be who we are. Now, the irony is if instead you just decide, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, this is who I am, then you wind up with the people who will love and accept you and respect you. The others will go away.
So I'm fourth generation entrepreneur and have the most confident man in the world is my father. And 4 days out of the week, I'm just like him. And one day I question it, like that imposter thing. So I know exactly what you're saying. So I'm blessed to have you as the first time on a podcast. And I asked you the question, if you're ever going to do only one podcast, what would be your advice?
All right. So how did I respond to that? My first thought when I read that question was, and some people will balk at this, but
Okay.
everything is a blessing. Now, let me explain.
Absolutely.
First thought is there was a mathematician some years ago who tried to calculate our odds of ever being born. He came up with 1 in 400 trillion. So just being born is way beyond hitting any lottery.
It is a blessing. It
So,
literally is a blessing.
right. So that's number one. Number two is when anything good happens, anything coincidentally or by our own labors or by the benefit from loved ones and kind, caring people, anything good happens, that's a blessing. That's obvious. Now, our job there is to notice it, embrace it, pass it on,
Yes.
pay it forward, and feel good about it, and all that's kind of obvious stuff. But what about when it hits the fan, when things just go really dark? In the moment, it's about the amygdala and survival, but we need to be able to retrieve our executive function, our cerebral cortex, in order to take steps and climb out. Now, again, going back to the caveman, when that amygdala kicks in, the fight or flight response, the adrenaline gets into the bloodstream and cuts off the blood supply to the frontal lobe and the cerebral cortex. So we literally, for just a little while, lose IQ points.
That's what happens.
Right. That's why we can't.
No, it's like you try to I get stupid for a
Right. It's
period of time.
abada.
Exactly. Or for me, the inability to process and think the way I want to
Yes.
think.
You don't have enough oxygen to those neurons. And that's, again, that was to survive. I need to run away. I need to fight. I need to go hide.
So one of my all-time favorite books, Wes, is from a guy by the name of Chris Prentice, who runs some substance abuse places in California. And he uses a lot of the spirituality that we're talking about. And it talks about things happen for the best possible reasons. We just don't know why at that time.
So I'll tell you a quick joke and then a Buddhist reference to the joke.
Perfect.
Third grade class goes on a field trip to a farm. Little Billy is out of control and in the first 5 minutes disappears. So the teacher has the chaperones take the other kids, and she runs out looking for him, yelling for him. She notices the barn door to the horse barn is open, and they had mucked out all the stalls. You probably have heard this.
No,
Anyway,
going.
she walks in, and here's Billy in the middle of this pile of horse muck, slinging it, laughing, And she goes, Billy, what are you doing? And he says, with all this horseshit, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. So there is a pony, but it's not in the muck.
Understood.
It's out there. My parallel Buddhist reference is the first principle is life is suffering. Life is difficult. Someone told me the literal definition in Sanskrit is life is a compost heap or a dung heap on which grow flowers, vegetables, other plants, and all living beings. So when the dump truck backs up and dumps it on us, our first thought is to go fight or flight. But the real work is, how do I turn this into some fertilizer?
So you spent your life helping people figure out how to turn things into fertilizer. That's like I said in your article and in talking to you. And so where do you want to go with that? Because,
Well, I'll tell you at least one story, my favorite story, because this is a guy, when I met him, I was running a drug and alcohol rehab, 50-bed hospital, and my marketing guy, I think it was in March, it was really cold outside, brings this guy in. He's homeless. He's got on Bermuda shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. He seems to be mentally ill, but he's an addict and alcoholic. We had an empty bed. So I said, well, let's put him in detox and see how it goes. And the next day, he demands to see me. I'm the clinical director, and I come in and he says, I have to go say goodbye to my mom. She's dying, and I promise I'll come back. Now, I don't remember this, but he told me that what I said to him was, well, you can leave, but you can't come back. And he stayed. Flash forward, he slept in a sleeping bag on his AA sponsor's floor for years. He swept warehouses, and he got a message from his higher power that he needed to go out west. And I thought, oh no, his mental illness is coming back. Well, he moved out to Flagstaff, Arizona, began doing volunteer work.
Smart man, beautiful
Working
place.
in the hospital, found out he could go to school for free, got a master's degree, a bachelor's and master's degree in social work. Before
Probably
he
at the
died,
University of Northern Arizona. There you go.
he was given the governor's award for volunteerism for the state of Arizona. His entire life, he lived in a tiny little one-room sublet and just loved life. He was my hero. He taught me. And here's what he said to me. The last time I saw him, we were out in Arizona to go to the Grand Canyon with my family, and I met him for breakfast. And he said, Wes, I would not change one thread in the tapestry of my life history because I might mess everything up.
Oh my goodness. So how come we muck it all up with stuff?
Well, we're human beings. The human is the ego.
Okay.
And the purpose of the ego is important because the ego is what kept us alive through caveman days all the way up today. How to stay alive, how to stay healthy, and how to stay safe. But the ego thinks it's more than it is, and it wants more than it is. And we begin to muck things up. So that's the human.
So we
The
really
being,
can help ourselves?
well, the being is the other half of who we are. And I refer to that as the spirit that connects all of us to each other and to the world around us, to the universe. And it's basically this wisdom knowledge that anything that's good for the world is good for me, and anything that's bad for the world is bad for me because we're all one. And if I can make decisions that benefit not just me, but those around me, then we're going to move forward in a good way and we're going to be connected. The ego says it's me against them, and I've got to compete and beat them down, or they'll get it all and I won't get enough.
Do you think we can talk to our politicians to maybe listen to this a little bit? I know, not a political comment, but good
We
time
can
to
try.
do that.
I mean,
We can try.
any of us that rise into a position of success and financial and business success and power have some strong ego traits. And
Yes.
those can be wielded for good and those can be wielded for harm.
Wes, I've spent my lifetime trying to understand change in business. I teach change. It's one of the core values in my business. We talk about being change agents, but when I read your stuff, and there was so much about change that I hadn't thought about, would you just talk a little bit about some of that? Is it hopefully I'm setting you up for success there?
So, again, to reference Buddhist psychology, the only thing that's guaranteed is change. Everything, every single thing in this plane, in this existence, comes and goes. It's even referenced in the beginning of some chapters in the New Testament. It came to pass. It didn't come to stay, it came to pass.
Came to pass.
Until we accept that we go after things to make life good and to make life healthy and safe and satisfying and rewarding and have the things and people around, until we accept that all of that is temporary and we need to enjoy it while it lasts. Warren Zevon, in his last public appearance on the David Letterman show before he passed away, said, David Letterman, in a rare moment of seriousness, said, "Do you have anything you want to pass on to your fans?" And he leaned forward to the camera and he says, "Enjoy every sandwich."
Enjoy so, but as humans, we get attached to things.
Right. And then we get entitled. Our ego says, "That's mine.
Yes.
I don't want to give that up." Oh, wait, you've got something I want. That's got to be mine too. And again, the three sources of suffering in Buddhist philosophy is grasping, greed, hatred, aversion, and ignorance, thinking things are different than they are. And when I first read that, I spent probably a year or more trying to find something that didn't fit into one of those three.
You're trying to prove it wrong,
Yeah. I thought it can't just be three things.
but it's thousands of years old. It has to be, right? I guess
Well,
that's the
right. It's everything we do that causes us pain or causes others pain is either out of greed, hatred, or confusion, ignorance. So accepting change, rolling with the flow. Taoist philosophy is another good reference for dealing with change. The basic idea is that the universe, the energy and the waves and the flow of the universe goes where it will, and we can fight it, swim upstream, or we can navigate our sails and rudders so that we use it to benefit us.
Did you discover all this spirituality to support your work, or was it in your work?
It was a deep searching kind of compulsion that I've had since I was a kid.
Yeah. Okay. I'm late to this. I want to be stoic, but everything, it all makes such sense to me.
Yeah, well, as you know, I think I mentioned my maternal grandfather was the president of a Southern Baptist seminary in New Orleans.
Yes.
So he and seven of his eight brothers were all either ministers or missionaries, medical missionaries or theologians teaching in colleges. So I was born into this family that is searching for this deep meaning. What was it? April of 1968. So I was 14 years old. On a Wednesday night prayer meeting, I walk out, and I'm going to try to say this without being emotional. And there was this was a tiny little Baptist church in Pineville, Louisiana. It was a group of deacons laughing about the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I was devastated.
Because they were role models.
It flew in the face of everything that I was taught about the message of Christ, which is love. And so that kind of launched, between that and my genetic sort of predisposition to searching, threw me into this kind of compulsive search for, well,
This whirlwind.
what's real, what matters, what's right, what's good.
So was it that these were people you looked up to, or was it the role and what you thought that role was supposed to play, or both? Probably both.
It shattered my ignorance, my delusion of what I'm hearing versus who they were. I didn't condemn everybody. This was just one group of men that I didn't even know who they were, but I knew that they were deacons in this church that one of my buddies went to. It just woke me up. So again, it was the pile of dung that I had spent my lifetime kind of creating fertilizer and trying to grow some clarity, wisdom, knowledge, information. I guess the other thing I should say is you never get there.
But there must be something in the pursuit.
Yeah, I mean, what could be more important?
Nothing. To me, so I've asked a lot of questions. I want to pause, and where would you like to go with other messages? There's always prep for a show. The world knows.
I mean, I'm curious. Were there some pivotal moments that would be worth sharing in your journey? Because clearly you're on a seeking journey yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I think having this be as transparent as possible. For some reason, and this is, I don't have a story like yours, but the pandemic really shook me. And I was taking call after call from business owner, because I coach business owners, usually to help them scale. And I'm in the staffing business. So all of a sudden I felt like, I don't know, a movie reference. Do you remember the Green Mile where the prisoner hears all the problems of the world? In my own selfish way, ego way, I felt like all I was doing was businesses closing. Nobody had any answers. I consider myself a leader of leaders. And then thousands of employees weren't sure what was going on. So I started this show as a way right then and there to try and get messages out to help people. So that would certainly be one.
You turned it into as fertilizer to kind of grow some things. Nice.
Pulled staffing firm owners together that had never talked before, thought they were arch enemies, and we worked together to help each other. The pursuit, I would say, as a young person, I did not appreciate knowledge and reading. And the older I get, the more I'm interested in understanding things I'm not able to quite get the answer to. So I'm known as the nutty professor, Wes, and I read incessantly. And of spirituality, I'm seeking answers. I'm seeking understanding. So I've chosen to weave that into the culture of placers and who I am. And the more I do it, the more I think it works, because it's my authentic journey.
Right.
So that's why I was excited to have, because you know what? I mean, obviously you're helping people, but you're helping people in business and you're helping people in life. It's all the same, right? It's all the same.
Yeah. People ask me why I haven't retired. I'm only working part-time now. I'm 71. I know I don't look it.
No, you don't. I was thinking that. Yeah.
But I love what I do. I feel like it's a calling. And I love the companies and the people in those companies that I work with. I love my patients and my colleagues. And what am I going to do? I mean, I can only ride my bike so much.
And I think it's fair to say it's not work. It is, but
it's very satisfying, very rewarding.
All right.
And I benefit from it. So it's.
Well, I know that feeling. But yet I always, right before I get on the podcast, I take a few deep breaths and I just say to myself, we're doing some good today. We're getting some good messages out. So do that on Thursday nights. Maybe it gets you through a busy Friday.
Right.
Any advice?
You ask about success, like how I define success, and that's kind of what you just said. I said if I can find health and contentment for myself and those around me, I've had a successful day. If I can allow my primal brain to go nuts without letting it direct me, and then choose a win-win response, then it was a successful challenge. If I can be grateful rather than prideful and arrogant about my blessings or my successes, then that's success. If when I'm struggling, I can let myself be vulnerable and smart enough to pick the right people and information to let in and to navigate through it, then that's success. And enjoy every sandwich.
I think that's pretty good stuff. We can't cover them all. You're obviously an avid reader. It's relative to your field. But if you were to pick one or two, if people liked what we talked about, what might be a book or two that, well, by the way, we'll list the entire list.
Yeah, let me see.
If you were to pick a couple.
So there's an audio recording of several lectures that Jack Kornfield does called The Roots of Buddhist Psychology. It's one of those that if you listen to it, you learn a lot, and then you listen to it again and you learn something else. And I've been through it many times, and it helps you kind of cognitively and emotionally, behaviorally embrace this idea of life is difficult, and there are certain intelligent, useful, skillful ways to make it go well, and to make it go well for yourself and others. So that's a good one. Tara Brach, Brach, wrote a book called Radical Acceptance, and she's a meditation teacher and therapist.
Do you know, Wes, I have that on the shelf and I've never read it.
Okay.
So I know what I'm going to grab.
Okay. And then the classic Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. You know, if anybody can survive what he did and come out with a sense of connection and spiritual oneness with
I think it's
love and
probably worth
others.
noting that the fact that it's, loosely defined by the concentration camps, it scares people away a little bit. But it's actually a rather strong book about talking about how the strong survived, etc. So I encourage everybody. That topic tends to like, oh, I don't want to go there,
Right.
but it's not.
It's
Yeah,
distressing. It makes us look at the dark side of humanity.
but he actually looks at the light side of humanity in the darkest moments, which
Right.
is why it's so powerful. Okay, that's on we share that. That's on my top 5 reading list that I always
Okay.
think about. So that's superb. So it's a chance to pause for a second here. We've got a lot of messages out. Any lessons that we haven't covered? I know we've got some stuff prepared on maybe on taking care of yourself,
Okay.
but we can pause here and just like, how would you
So
bring us home?
a couple of things. One is people who have experienced significant emotional trauma in their life, particularly as a child or adolescent, young adult, are going to struggle with a lot of this and are going to need the right kind of professional help to deal with finding some grounding and centering so that they can benefit from a lot of this information. It's not that they're not smart enough or good enough or capable. It's that they've survived so much that they need some extra conditioning before they can find the benefit from a lot of this. So I encourage people to, as I said, reach out and get some help. The last thing I'll say is that none of this works like a New Year's resolution
Or a pill.
or a pill. It's like contemplating radical transformational commitment until you're ready to be there. And then finding the right kind of ritual, people, ceremony, path forward, and support to say, I'm no longer going to live a victim to my lack of support, lack of knowledge, lack of skills, misguided thoughts about things, emotional distress, my amygdala. I'm going to do whatever I can to learn how to live in a useful, productive, skillful, compassionate way.
Wes, that's elegantly stated. I appreciate you being here today. I think there's 20 more topics I'd like to ask you about. And maybe if you're willing, you'd come back for round 2 and we'll pick a handful of things if we get some audience feedback of what they might like to talk about.
I'd be happy to. This was great. I really enjoyed getting to know you a bit and having the opportunity to pass this stuff along.
So, Wes, we get to end it this way. Tell them why you felt comfortable sharing your gifts. We might share, maybe Jerry had something to do with it.
In our first contact, I was saying I don't I don't care who plagiarizes me or who repeats what I says and takes credit for it. I'm kind of like Jerry Garcia. It's like if you wanna pirate my CDs or cassettes or record my concerts, the more people that learn this and know this, the better the world is. So take it and run with it.
And at that point, I stood up and had a Grateful Dead belt on, and we've been fast friends ever since. However, not to devalue the message is you're willing to share to help people, which is very much what Outside Insights is all about.
Right. And ironically, that's a selfish thing too, because if the world improves, my life improves.
Back to your point about us all being connected. Well, Wes, again, thank you very much. Thanks for being a guest today. Look forward to having you back. A few years back, I started Outside Insights really as a platform to do good. The pandemic was raging. It was a time of confusion, angst, and it kind of triggered some creativity where, for me, I was constantly spending time with either entrepreneurial business clients or the workforce. And there were problems with people not necessarily being where they want to be in life. So the irony is Outside Insights and my book Opposite the Crowd, which I co-authored with my dad, Alan Burkhardt, were kind of born together, as Alan was some of those early guests. And those guest shows turned into chapters of our book. It was an audiobook first. It can be found anywhere you listen to audiobooks or listen to podcasts. It's out in both. But I did want to share for those of you that are interested in reading our story. And there really is some great stuff about helping you have the life you want, helping you work on leadership or master change. There's some great stuff in there. And that book is now available. It's available in a hardback from Amazon, and the Kindle as well as Audible versions are up. And I ask that you just, you're on Amazon anyway, ordering stuff for the house. Check out Opposite the Crowd and let me know what you think. Thank you.